So this video is not only going to cover the 5 ways that you are hurting yourself and not making as much money with a midterm rental as you should, but we're also going to talk about strategies to help you help yourself. So let's go ahead and get started. And the first thing that we're going to talk about are people, guests, tenants that want an extension. And I know that this is happening a lot because I'm co-hosting for a lot of people throughout the United States. And what I am seeing time and time again are tenants that are coming in and they're asking if they can extend their rental. So they're only going to book for a month, but they want to extend their rental. There is an important point here that we should discuss, and it is that Airbnb will tell you that they only take 3%. And that's true. They only take 3% from the host, but they take 15% from the tenant, so roughly 18%, and you have to account for that because your tenant is only going to be willing to pay so much, and that 15% is going to be part of their calculation. So really you need to think about it as 18%. If you have watched my videos in the past, you know I'm pro Airbnb. I think it's the most sophisticated platform. I think it has the most volume, and for those reasons, I think you're gonna have less vacancy, which means more money in your pocket. And you also don't want to cut them out of the transaction, because the worry and the issue here is that if you start to do cute things where you're like trying to sneak your email in or your phone number in, Airbnb's algorithm is going to get wind of that and then start to punish you. Now, we don't know that this happens, but I think the algorithm is smarter than you think. And the last thing you want to do is piss off Airbnb. Airbnb is more important to you than any single tenant. So they don't want you doing that. And the reason why they don't want you sharing your email or your phone number is because they want their cut. So when someone comes in and they say, hey, I want to rent your place for a month or two, but I'm considering an extension, you say, that's great news. We would love to have you. And you accept that initial request, and Airbnb takes their cut, right? So you lose the 3%, the tenant loses the 15%, you get everything else. But once you've accepted the request, you then have access to their email and their phone number, and then you can communicate with them off of Airbnb. So Airbnb is not going to punish you for this because they've already gotten their cut, but you also don't want to be negotiating the next rental and the way to work around Airbnb on Airbnb. So let's say the rental has gone well, you like them, they like you, they want another 3 months, and they message you on Airbnb and they say, hey, we want another 3 months. Don't even acknowledge that. Just email them and say, hey, why don't we work this out outside of Airbnb? And the benefit to that is that they pay less and you make more. In the world of real estate, where the term win-win is used a vomitous amount, this is a true win-win. They pay less, you make more. Couple things to note on this. First, if you take it outside of Airbnb, you need to protect yourself still, so you need a lease and a deposit. You don't take a lease or a deposit on Airbnb because the platform has you protected in that way, but outside of it, you need a lease and a deposit. Second, that deposit should be equal to 1 month's rent. Don't let anyone tell you differently on that. You need to protect yourself. And a way to protect yourself is with the deposit, because let's get real, you're not going to chase someone down in small claims court. It will not be worth your while. The deposit is basically going to be your only tool at that point. And then finally, before we get on to the next section, if you have learned something at this point, please like this video. If you learned something going forward, please like this video. All right, if you are new to this channel, my name is Erin Spradlin. Welcome. I am a midterm rental consultant. The mission of this channel is to prove to you that real estate investing is not that hard and to make it more accessible to more people. I think a lot of people get freaked out about real estate because of the amount of money that they're spending, but if you could distill it down to a $10 decision, it would be a lot easier to make that decision. I also encourage you to think about real estate investing being similar to investing in the stock market, meaning sometimes it's going to go down, sometimes it's going to come up. It is a buy and hold strategy, and you don't always need to have the perfect rental, the perfect tenant. You need to buy and sit and wait. So you really don't need to get too hung up on small things like making $40 more a month on tenant A versus tenant B, because over a 10-year time span, it probably won't make a difference. All right, let's get to the second way you're not making yourself as much money as you should. This one is hard. This one requires a certain level of self self-control and discipline and confidence and faith in yourself and in the platform and in your rental. And I know this because I'm going through it with one of my clients in Arizona. So this client has booked the Hold My Hand package, which means I've set up their listing and I am going to vet and set their first tenant. So we went live yesterday, and it's August of 2024. So I listed it. It went live yesterday. And as of like an hour ago today, so about a 24-hour, less than 24 hours, we've had like 4 or 5 people interested, but they're all interested for March of 2025. But it's September of 2024. So we have this 6-month gap. Now it is really tempting to take that March of 2025 because my clients are brand new to this experience. They haven't done it before. They didn't know if their place would rent. So now you have all this interest for March, and it is very, very tempting to take. But I am advising them not to take it. And the reason for that is because when you take rentals far in advance, you then have an issue with trying to fill in the gaps between now and then. And there's 6 months between August and March. This is not an issue in the short-term rental space because the short-term rental space is just a series of 2 or 3 day rentals, etc. But in the midterm rental space, you're renting for a month, you're renting for 2 months, you're renting for 3 months, you're renting for 3 months, and then someone wants an extension. So when you have this 6-month window, it becomes very awkward because you're increasingly making your tenant pool smaller because those people need to have your type of property in your time frame, and it needs to be 6 months or fewer for it to work. We are sticking to best practices. We only want to take a rental that starts 2 weeks, within 2 weeks of our next vacancy. Now, something I've pointed out to them, and I will point out to you, is that if you have this much demand in March, you should feel fully confident that you're going to be able to rent it in March, so you don't need to compromise on that now. All right, number 3, the third way you are working against your own interests. This one is so basic, it's so elementary, it's so odd, it's so self-defeating. I'm embarrassed I even have to say it, but I do have to say it, and that is not taking professional photos. If you don't believe me, just imagine if you were going to sell your house and the realtor was going to get a 3% commission to help you sell the house, and they just took a bunch of stupid iPhone photos with weird angles and dark shadows and put that up on the MLS. Would you be happy with them? Would you be okay with that? If you would be, you shouldn't. It's like realtor malfeasance 101. So don't do that to yourself. Pay for a professional photographer, and more importantly, pay for a real estate photographer, because I am seeing this go wrong a lot of ways, even with people that have hired professional photographers. So the way to find a real estate photographer is to ask your real estate agent, who do you use? Who do you like? Can I get their information? Because they can obviously take your rental photos as well. A note on this, I am going to do a video on how to do real estate photos and how to coach the photographer that is doing the real estate photos in your place if it's not your realtor's photographer, but I don't know when that's going to come out. So if you want a notification on that, whenever it does come out, I recommend subscribing because you'll get a notification. Just a few quick tips on that though. If they're photographing the inside of your place, all of the blinds and curtains should be up and the cabinet doors should not be open. No one is going to rent your place based on the glassware behind those cabinets. If the glassware is not behind those cabinets or there's no glassware, then that's a problem, but it's assumed and you don't need to show it. And in fact, showing it is like additional information and it's a distraction from the things that they actually would rent on. And a couple of things that people actually do care about is the configuration. So like a 3-bed, 2-bath. So whatever the bed bath setup is, the location, the storage, the parking spaces, those are all things that you want to focus on much more than the open cabinet. So keep the curtains and blinds open with the photographer, make sure the cabinet doors are shut, and then I can probably think of 10 others right off the top of my head. All right, section 4, this is not as egregious as not getting professional photos, but it's pretty close, and it comes from the same place as the opening of cabinet doors. And again, what I mean by that is probably somebody once opened some cabinet doors, thought it was a good idea. Other people started copying it, and now we have this self-defeating trend that no one should be doing. So in this case, what I'm talking about is that the internet and AI can steer you wrong, if you can believe it. And that's because it's just scraping data that already exists, regardless of whether or not that data is useful. If you type into ChatGPT, give me a headline, here's a couple of examples that I got back. And these examples are really common and they're also really bad. Oasis is subjective, nearby is subjective, modern is subjective, heart of is subjective. These words mean different things to different people, so you should be much more specific in your headline. So you should say 3-bed, 2-bath, washer and dryer on site, half a mile to the closest grocery store. That is not a fancy headline, but it is a good headline. It gives people specifics. It makes you stand out from your competition. And in the midterm space, so again, this is a differentiation from the short-term space. In the short-term space, people sometimes want a theme. The theme of the rental is part of their experience. In the midterm space, the only theme is living like a local. So tell them exactly how far it is from the grocery store, how far it is from the interstate, how far it is from the bank. Those are things that should be showing up in your description and in your headline if midterm tenants are your focus. Before I get to the final point, I have 3 books on midterm rentals. This is the 3rd one. It's the most recent one that I've written, but it's a lot about marketing and strategy. I think because it says workbook, people think it's going to be like homework. It's kind of homework, but really it just walks you through, if you're a new landlord, what you should be looking for in a tenant, like what a modern tenant score is, the questions you should ask a tenant, how to write your listing, what to think about, how to highlight it, how to buy a property if you haven't bought one, and how to think about a property if you already own it. So this one and my other 2 are available on Amazon, and I will link to them in the description. Okay, so final point, 5th point. I had this with a repeat client this week. He is in a city and he had tenants come in. Those tenants were really great. They paid a rate that he liked, everything else, but they had to cut their rental short because they had an emergency and they needed to leave the rental. So now the rental is open again. And so he is looking at comps on Airbnb, but not necessarily thinking about the fact that those comps are 18% higher. What the guest pays is 18% higher than what the landlord gets. So he was really digging in on the price. And I kept saying, we are not going to get that price. And it was like, well, I can see that all of my competition is getting this price. But that's not true. The competition is advertised at that price, but then Airbnb is taking their cut. So we were having kind of a back and forth. And on top of that, the property had been listed for a couple of weeks and he wasn't getting any interest. So the reason why I bring this up is because I have heard other people that have heard from podcasts or other platforms that they should get 2 times their long-term rate, but then they put it up and they're not getting anywhere close to 2 times their long-term rate. All of which is to say, don't be dug in on a price. That is the number one way that you will lose money on a rental, is when you're like, the price has to be this and the market is telling you something different. Okay, if you want to see the other videos in this series, this is the playlist. So it's data from 5 different midterm rentals. And again, it will talk about what first-time hosts made, how long it took them to get their first midterm tenant, whether or not it made sense to do a midterm instead of just a straight up unfurnished long-term, the different tenant types. And then this is the final one, which is common mistakes that a lot of midterm hosts make. Again, if you learned something in this video, please like it. If you want more content like this, please subscribe. If you want consulting, I'm dropping that in the description. And if you are looking for midterm rental books, there are 3 on Amazon that I've written. And then finally, if you're furnishing a place, I have a midterm rental shop, and that's a great place to go and just price out what your furniture will potentially cost. That often will tell you if a long-term makes sense or if a midterm makes sense.